Thank you very much for this reception. I would like to start by expressing my gratitude to the Bon Mot Book Club and also indeed to Ms. Leah Castello for having invited me to this very august gathering of corporate Canada, may I say. It's my pleasure and my unique privilege to be able to have this opportunity to speak to you on a subject that we mutually decided to be Pakistan's domestic or internal and external dynamics, and indeed the dynamics of the region. The subject selected was mutually selected, and I think it's very apt in that it is today our region and Pakistan is the happening place. All important things are happening there. As far as I am concerned, there has never been a dull moment in my life as long as I was there. And therefore, the world's focus, the geostrategic focus of the world is totally riveted to our area, to Pakistan, to Afghanistan. So I'm going to cover this region. And as far as I'm concerned, I have, as I said, never had a dull moment when I was governing Pakistan. But then, these days, I'm relaxing. I'm on lecture circuits all around the world. But then I thought maybe I need to recreate some extra excitement in my life, and therefore I've decided to go back into politics and return to Pakistan. I will return to Pakistan because Pakistan needs. Irrespective of any risks, I intend returning because I know Pakistan has all the potential to deal with its problems, to stand on its own, and to prosper. And I say this with full conviction of 9 years of experience, having taken over Pakistan when it was in total doldrums, when we were being declared a failed state, a defaulted state, and we were almost bankrupt. And in 6 years, we transformed that Pakistan, that in 2006, we were declared one of the N11 states of the world. After the BRIC 4, which is Brazil, Russia, India, and China, the N11 countries, Pakistan happened to be one of the N11 countries of the economically vibrant 11 countries of the world. This was done in 6 years. That was because of the potential of Pakistan and the potential of the people of Pakistan. So therefore, I know that it can be done again, and therefore, I will try to do it again. It's better to try and fail rather than not to try at all. Having said this, ladies and gentlemen, without much ado, since there is a time constraint, I will straight plunge into the subject. First of all, I would like to take on Pakistan's location dynamics. I'm sure everyone knows the geography of the area, but I would like to highlight what the significance of Pakistan is. Pakistan, ladies and gentlemen, is a regional hub. It lies at the crossroads between the West Asia, or the Gulf especially, in the west, Central Asia, Afghanistan in the north, landlocked, Western China in the northeast, and South Asia in the east. We are in the center of this region. Therefore, we provide connectivity to the whole region. In that, the Central Asian republics and Afghanistan, which are landlocked, are looking towards the sea to approach the world, to have access to the world. It can only be done through Pakistan, the shortest route. Then, if you look at India, India wants to do trade with Afghanistan and Central Asian republics, and it wants to have energy from Turkmenistan or Iran. It can only be done if Pakistan is on board. If we look at China, China is also looking at energy. It gets its energy from the Gulf, but it is also looking at gas from Iran. And also it's looking at trade with the world, obviously. But the shortest route for China to the world, especially to Africa or Southeast Asia or Europe, is through Pakistan to the ports of Pakistan. And if it wants to develop economic relations with India, the shortest route is Pakistan. So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, may I say the Pakistan provides the trade and energy corridor for this whole world. On a lighter vein, to express this importance, significance of Pakistan, once I was at the United Nations Summit, when I was addressing a press conference, there was a lady who asked me whether at that time we were dealing with the IPI, the Iran-Pakistan-India pipeline, gas pipeline. A lady asked me a question that would you allow this pipeline to go from Iran to India? I said, yes, indeed, we will allow that. But then she went on to say, well, people of India do not trust Pakistan. So I said, no, we are going to give all international, we'll abide by all international conventions, and we are going to allow this pipeline. It's beneficial for both countries. Then she still persisted and she said, well, people of India don't trust you. So now I got agitated and I said, lady, where are you from? And she said, I'm from India. I said, I knew that. And I said, then may I ask you, may I request you to go back to India and tell your leaders they can take the gas by air, because Pakistan is there and I am there, unfortunately. So that is the significance of the location of Pakistan as a trade and energy corridor for this entire region. Nothing can happen in trade and energy between countries unless Pakistan is on board. And if we see the Gwadar port, which we have now made, which I have made actually, I did the opening, the earth breaking and the inauguration. At the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz, the choke point of Hormuz, is an ideal container terminal and an oil terminal. And it is an ideal exit port for Afghanistan, for Central Asian republics, for China. So that is the significance of merely the geography of Pakistan. So with this brief review of the geographic significance of Pakistan, I would now like to carry out a broad survey of the responses or the dynamics, the key responses and dynamics of Pakistan, what events during its history shaped our responses and dynamics of significance. So I am going to divide this whole period since our independence into various blocks of timings and then cover certain significant events which then shaped our responses. I'll take the first event, or before that, 1947, maybe most of you know, we had our partition in 1947. It was an extremely violent partition where hundreds of thousands of people were butchered between India and while shifting from Pakistan to India or India to Pakistan. I was one of them who came from Delhi to Pakistan, and I still remember in my memory, I was a very small boy, people lying dead on the railway lines and on the platforms as we came from Delhi to Karachi. So this was a very, very violent beginning to our existence. But then I will take the period of 1947 to 1979 first of all. This is the period, I will call it the setting of the direction of Pakistan. We fought the first war in 1948 with India. As a fledgling nation of 1 year, we fought a war over Kashmir. And it was after this war that we started feeling an existential threat to our very being, to our existence. And therefore, we decided to develop a strategic alliance with the West, with the United States. And we joined we joined CENTO, we joined SEATO as a partner with the West in the Cold War period, in the East-West conflict. And may I remind you that India joined the East. It was in collusion with Soviet Union. At this time now, since 1950s, because of the existential threat that was posed, we developed a military strategy of our own. And this military strategy, the basis was a military strategy of minimum defensive deterrence. And we quantified this minimum defensive deterrence into force levels for Army, Navy, Air Force. And it was this force level that we always maintained to deter aggression from India, the main threat coming from the East. But we fought 2 wars in 1965 and 1971. I was a part of both the wars. So I have seen the ravages of war. And Kashmir happened to be the main cause of the wars, the Kashmir dispute. Pakistan has an emotional attachment with the people of Kashmir because this was a dispute since 1948, where it's a United Nations case that it has to be decided with plebiscite and will of the people. So we fought 2 more wars. But may I highlight here that since 1948 onwards, we developed the RAW of India, the intelligence agency, and ISI of Pakistan, the so-called rogue agency, developed a confrontationist approach between themselves. All along since 1948, an adversarial contest between the two. We both, the ISI and RAW, were harming each other since 1948. Why I am highlighting this is somehow ISI is always highlighted everywhere, but nobody talks of RAW, which incited Mukti Bahini in East Pakistan, that they broke away with a physical Indian attack in East Pakistan with all the armed forces, where the Prime Minister of India declared her best achievement in her life, that she split Pakistan, and that the army chief was promoted Field Marshal, General Manekshaw. So this was our adversarial relationship between Pakistan and India, and also between ISI and RAW. So therefore, please, why I am highlighting, do not look at one incident in isolation. It's a whole history since 1948. Should not be done, but both sides have to stop. You cannot pinpoint one as the culprit and the rogue, while the other is wonderful. They are very peace-loving. That's not the case. It's always been like that. We've been harming each other. We've been doing all kinds of harms to each other. Then I would like to also talk of the nuclear dimension here. It's very significant. We are both nuclear states, and the world thinks that this is a nuclear flashpoint, which is terrible. But how did it come about? I think we've forgotten. Again, Pakistan is the rogue, unfortunately. 1974, ladies and gentlemen, India exploded its first nuclear device and called it a peaceful nuclear device, a peaceful nuclear explosion. Let Iran do its peaceful nuclear explosion also. So therefore, there is nothing like a peaceful nuclear explosion. And we allowed that in 1974. That was the time when Pakistan saw that its strategy of minimum defensive deterrence became untenable, because that was in the conventional terms. Now in the unconventional field, there was an imbalance which was created. Therefore, the government at that time decided to go nuclear. Rightly. Very rightly. So therefore, we started developing our nuclear potential because India went nuclear. In this period, ladies and gentlemen, may I say that United States and Pakistan relations were, I would term them normal to good. I am saying this because in many places in the United States, a lot of people ask me a question, why do Pakistanis dislike Americans? and United States. I'm going to come to that later. But at this period, for these up to 79, it was very good relations. We were strategic partners. Now I'll come to the next period of 79 to 89. This is the period, ladies and gentlemen, when Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, took over Afghanistan. And the West and the United States' interest was to contain Soviet expansion, because they had intentions of going through Pakistan onto the warm waters of the Indian Ocean. And Pakistan's interest also, ladies and gentlemen, was that for the first time we had a two-front threat from the east and now from the west with the Afghan-Soviet collusion. Therefore, our interest and US interest was to defeat Soviet Union. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we launched a jihad. We called it a jihad. When I say we, by the way, United States and Pakistan in the lead role, using people of Afghanistan. We called it a jihad with the intention to draw mujahideen from the whole world, from the Muslim world. And may I tell you that 25,000 mujahideens came from Morocco to Indonesia, into this region. We armed them and sent them in. We didn't stop there. We trained Taliban of the tribal agencies of Frontier Province. We armed them and pumped them into Afghanistan to fight the Soviets. For 10 years, we did this. Because, as I said, the goals of Pakistan and United States were the same, to defeat Soviet Union in their own interests. But I would like to highlight two important developments in Afghanistan during this 10-year period. Number one, that Afghanistan, ladies and gentlemen, was held together over these centuries under an arrangement called Misaq-e-Milli, to be translated into a national covenant, a national agreement. And the agreement was that all the ethnic groups, and that is Pashtun, the majority, 50-55%, and the minorities of Uzbeks, Tajiks, and Hazaras, would stay together. They decided to stay together under the sovereignty of the king. And they stayed together for centuries under this Misaq-e-Milli. But when the Soviets came, they deposed the king. So therefore, that glue that held Afghanistan together was no more. These ethnic groups were separated. That glue had gone. One is this significant event of 1979. And the other was that all the elites of Afghanistan, ladies and gentlemen, abandoned Afghanistan. They ran away. They had the resources, they came into Europe and United States. And therefore, the fight or the jihad against the Soviet Union was spearheaded by religious militant groups in Afghanistan. So therefore, we injected religious militancy in the form of religious militant groups in Afghanistan, Mujahideen from all over the Muslim world, Taliban from Pakistan, for 10 years. Now I come to the period of 89 to 2001, ladies and gentlemen. And may I say, in these 10 years, relations with the United States, excellent. Everything was happening through Pakistan. The people of Pakistan were accepting everything. No problem with the United States. Then comes the period 89 to 2001, ladies and gentlemen. I call this the changing of moods and the decade of disaster. The United States decides to abandon Pakistan and the region. All of a sudden, in 89, having won a victory for the West, won the Cold War, defeated Soviet Union, and unified Germany. So I have seen a plaque of the Berlin Wall in the house of a chief of our intelligence organization, presented by the chief of German intelligence. And the plaque underneath read, "To the one who struck the first blow." In other words, German reunification was struck in Afghanistan because Soviets were defeated. So this is what Pakistan's role was for the West. For 42 years, till 89, we were the strategic partner. We led the charge against the Soviets. We defeated them, ended in victory, to be abandoned. Sanctions imposed on Pakistan by the infamous Pressler Amendment. And a strategic shift in the United States towards India, which has always been with the East. What do the people of Pakistan take that? A betrayal. The people of Pakistan thought it's a betrayal of Pakistan, that we have been used and thrown aside. This is what happened in that decade. And what followed reinforced this, because there was no resettlement, no rehabilitation of Mujahideen in Afghanistan. So this 25,000 Mujahideen who knew nothing other than fighting became Al-Qaeda, coalesced. These famous names, al-Zawahiri and Osama bin Laden, sir, they were brought in the 80s. They were heroes in the 80s. And now they are the villains. So all this. And then Taliban emerged in 1996. So in this vacuum of 12 years, where there was mayhem and every ethnic group fighting against each other, the Pashtuns being divided into 6 or 7 groups, and then Hazaras, Uzbeks, Tajiks, they destroyed and ravaged Afghanistan. I went to Afghanistan, to Kabul early after 9/11. There was not one house that I could see with a roof. They were totally destroyed. This is what happened for 12 years, in spite of the fact that we won a victory there for the West. So this is the reason why the downslide against, in the people's mind, against United States. And there were 4 million refugees which came into Pakistan. I remember in an article in a paper some time back, where there was a shipload of Vietnamese, I think, or Viet Cong or Vietnamese going to Australia, and that was a huge hue and cry because some couple of 100 people were going. 4 million refugees, more than a country in Europe, came into Pakistan, and we were all alone. Nobody to help us. And therefore the ISI, what was ISI doing? ISI was ensuring our national security. We evolved a strategy to protect ourselves from the ravages that was going on in Afghanistan. And when the Taliban came into being, Taliban had ethnic affinity with Pakistan, with people of frontier and Balochistan. And they took over 90% of Afghanistan. So obviously we recognized them. Obviously we had relations with them. Nobody was with us. So we were alone. So we thought that our best option is to be on the side which has ethnic, cultural, religious, geographic, historical relations with us. The other side, which was Northern Alliance, was being assisted by India and Russia. How could Pakistan be with them? So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, Pakistan at that time had a tilt towards the Taliban. Now, at this time, I forgot to give the blunders en route. The first blunder that the United States committed was to abandon that place in 1989, for which the whole scenario changed, and Afghanistan and Pakistan had to suffer all the ravages of whatever we did for 10 years, having introduced religious militancy into the area. Then, as if that was not enough, Kashmir freedom struggle started in 1989, ladies and gentlemen. And this freedom struggle had total public sympathy in Pakistan. Dozens of Mujahideen, independent Mujahideen groups sprung up in Pakistan. Thousands of volunteers willing to go and fight the Indian army in Kashmir. All these much maligned names of LET, Lashkar-e-Taiba, JM, Jaish Muhammad, HUM, Hizbul Mujahideen, are all products of the willingness of the people of Pakistan to go and fight the Indians in Kashmir. So this happened. So what is the impact of all this, ladies and gentlemen, on Pakistan? Religious militancy in Afghanistan, everyone fighting each other, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, Mujahideen groups in Kashmir. Pakistan's national fabric was torn asunder. There was drug and Kalashnikov culture introduced. There was religious militancy introduced in Pakistan. So we suffered. We kept suffering. And this was certainly not the best reward for 42 years of support with the West. Then comes, ladies and gentlemen, in 1998, India decided to explode, test its nuclear devices, which they did. There was a great demand in Pakistan that we must reciprocate, which we did again. This was the pride of Pakistan when we exploded our nuclear devices, because that was the strategy of minimum military defensive deterrence, which became untenable on the unconventional side, got tenable again in 1998 when we equaled India with their nuclear capability. So it had to be done to maintain our defensive credibility. So therefore we were nuclear, and we also made missiles because India started testing its missiles in early 1990. Therefore we had to develop missiles. The same strategy, minimum defensive deterrence in the conventional and also in the unconventional. So why are we the rogues? Why should Pakistan be the rogue? So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, all this introduced the nuclear dimension in the conflict in the region. And therefore, we became a nuclear flashpoint now. I leave it to you to understand who is to blame, Pakistan or India. And the biased approach of United States. While we are under sanctions, India is being encouraged. And a biased view even of our nuclear capability. We are the rogues, but with India we have strategic nuclear relations. So these biased views, therefore, led to more depression in the Pakistani public mind against the United States. And therefore, United States-Pakistan relations were at the lowest ebb. Not at the government level. At the government level, now there is a dichotomy, there is a conflict. While the government of Pakistan and the government of the United States certainly want good relations, it is a dictate, because it is the interest of both the countries to have good relations. We have economic, trade, commercial relations with the United States. We cannot do away with that. And United States, we also understand, is a sole superpower of the nation, of the world, in this unipolar world. But the people of Pakistan do not understand these parameters. So the people of Pakistan do not like the people of the United States or the United States because of whatever I have said. Now let me come to 9/11 and beyond, ladies and gentlemen. In 9/11, Taliban were defeated after 9/11 with the help of the minorities, Uzbek, Tajik, Hazaras, which we call the Northern Alliance. When the Taliban came into being, the infighting in Afghanistan, which was being done by about all the ethnic groups and Pakhtuns, if there were about 7 or 8, about 12 different groups, got divided into two: Taliban versus Northern Alliance. Now, with the help of Northern Alliance, the coalition forces defeated Taliban. And the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, all their command structure was totally dismantled. They ran helter-skelter into Pakistan, into the mountains and into the cities of Pakistan after 9/11. Here was an opportunity. There was a total void. Taliban defeated, their command structure shattered, no Al-Qaeda in the hills and mountains and cities of Pakistan only. There was a vacuum in Afghanistan. And may I say, here there was astute decisions required. That here was a case where the military instrument had delivered. They created an environment for you of being from a position of strength. That no more Taliban, no Al-Qaeda, all gone. There was a requirement now of shifting to the political instrument. And what was the political instrument? To get Pakhtun on board in the dominant position in governance in Kabul, in Afghanistan. Because Pakhtun historically have always ruled Afghanistan. You cannot rule Afghanistan with a minority as being done now, even now after 10 years almost, 9 years, with Tajiks, and that too not all Tajiks. The eastern Tajiks, who are called Panshiris, about 9%, 8%. And Pakhtuns being ignored. This window of opportunity was there from 2002 to 2004. It was in 2004 that we saw the Taliban resurgence. Because for these 2 years, we did not use the political instrument to put a legitimate government in Afghanistan. And legitimate government meaning Pakhtun-dominated government. With all the ethnic groups. With Tajik, Uzbek, Hazaras, certainly represented according to their population. But dominant position of Pakhtuns. We should have taken, I coined a term in 2002. All Taliban are Pakhtun, but all Pakhtun are not Taliban. So let us wean away Pakhtuns from Taliban. And that is what I started doing in Pakistan. In 2003 and 4, I was on the scene and I started doing that. Now how do I wean away Pakhtun from Taliban? All of them have beards, all of them are carrying weapons. I don't even know which one is Taliban, which one is Pakhtun. So we decided on an age-old tribal custom of jirgas. Jirga is a gathering of notables. They decide all their tribal feuds through jirgas. So I thought in every tribal agency, especially South and North Waziristan, let's hold jirgas. And let's take those elders on board. On what issue? No Al-Qaeda in your area. No Taliban activity across the border. Afghanistan is a different state, don't interfere. On these two parameters. But then when I did that, there was aspersions being cast on me that I am dealing with Taliban. I was not dealing with it, that I am double-crossing. I know many in the media in the West that I was a double-crosser. And whereas I was actually weaning away the Pakhtun from Taliban. And that was the strategy. Although in Pakistan, it was a tactical issue. We are not talking of Taliban or Pakhtun coming into governance, not at all. It was just meant peace in the tribal agencies, which are in South and North Waziristan, which is 0.3% of Pakistan's population only. 0.3%. In Afghanistan, Pakhtun taking on board means putting them in government. It's a strategic issue. It's a very big issue. So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we floundered there, and unfortunately, this was the biggest blunder, the third terrible blunder. So we missed this window of opportunity for 2 years. And this led to the resurgence of the Taliban in 2004, and we've come to the situation as it is now. Now, what is the situation now? In Afghanistan, Taliban are very strong. They are in the southern and southeastern part of Afghanistan. And they also are under the influence of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is in small numbers because of their successful operation jointly through joint intelligence cooperation in Pakistan, in our cities and mountains. Al-Qaeda is in small numbers. But they are the ones who give technical expertise. They are the ones with the brains. They are the ones who are training the Taliban. And also, may I say, another thing that we must realize, Taliban is not a monolith. It is not one commander with all the Taliban under command. A number of, everyone calls them Taliban. Mullah Umar is a Taliban. Haqqani is a Taliban. Gulbuddin Hikmatyar is a Taliban. On Pakistan side, TTP in Swat, Tehreek-e-Taliban, Pakistan, Fazlullah is in charge, calls himself Taliban. TNSM, another group, extremist religious, with Sufi Muhammad, calls himself Taliban. And then Baitullah Masood in South Waziristan called himself Taliban. What I am saying, it's not a monolith, and that's the good part. Let us see which one of them can be dealt with maybe. And we could deal with them in piecemeal. So this is good. But it is the Al-Qaeda which is trying to unify them maybe. So this is, on the Pakistan side, we are confronting 4 problems. Number 1 is Al-Qaeda. They are there in the mountains, but in small numbers, as I said. Then we are confronting Pakistani Taliban, who go across into Afghanistan. But more serious is that people from Punjab are also, they are the Punjabi Taliban who are coming and joining these Taliban. The third element is Talibanization, which is the spreading of Taliban culture, obscurantist culture, into the settled districts of the frontier province of Pakistan. And even beyond. This has to be contained. The fourth element is extremism in our society, certain areas of our society, especially South Punjab. These are the 4 elements that we contend with in Pakistan. Each one of them needs to be understood separately. Each one of them has a different strategy to tackle. Then I would like to take on India. India, unfortunately, behaves like an ostrich, not realizing what is happening there. In Kashmir, there is a freedom struggle, and there are Mujahideen groups. They have total sympathy in Pakistan. Nobody has to tell them to go there. No ISI has to tell them to go there. They are volunteers, thousands. They want to go there and fight. But more than that, there is religious extremism in the Muslims, youth in India. And I am saying this not because I am anti-India or something. That is also a problem, that whenever a Pakistani leader, whenever especially I speak against India, there is a general projection that I am very anti-India. If we want to see terrorism and extremism and address it in its holistic manner, we have to see the whole complexity of the situation. In India, because of the suppression of the Muslims, because of unequal treatment of the Muslims, there is despondency in the Muslim youth. Therefore, an organization like SIMI, Students Islamic Movement of India, gaining strength. And the worst is that all these extremists in India, Mujahideen in Kashmir, extremists of Pakistan, Taliban in Pakistan, Taliban in Afghanistan, trying to develop a nexus. That is the seriousness of the situation. And then we also have heard AQIM, Al-Qaeda in Islamic Maghreb, centered around Algeria and Mali. And then there is AQAP, Al-Qaeda in Arab Peninsula, centered around Somalia and Yemen. Now they are all Al-Qaeda. But they are not a monolith. They are not under one command. No Osama bin Laden sitting in the mountains is sending orders to them. They are all different, independent, call themselves Al-Qaeda. And they try to develop nexus underground. So these are the problems that is being faced all around the world. So therefore, if one has to see this entire complexity of this whole issue of the nexus of all this terrorist activity, where lies the center of gravity? As a military man, I've learned that if you want to fight an enemy, hit at its center of gravity. The center of gravity, ladies and gentlemen, lies in Afghanistan and the tribal agencies of Pakistan. We must defeat the enemy there. We cannot allow them to win there. So therefore, when we are talking of quitting, I would like to leave it as a food for thought, whether we are in the process of committing the fourth blunder. We must defeat the center of gravity. Otherwise, we will lose everywhere. And it will have its impact in London or UK or United States, where we do read about some extremists who tend to become terrorists. So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, now when we are talking of interacting with Taliban or moderate Taliban, it is unfortunate that we missed those 2 years of speaking from a position of strength when there was a vacuum. Now we are speaking from a position of weakness. So I don't know whether we will succeed. But we must do it all right. We must, but if at all, we must try to establish a position of strength first and then talk. Having operated in all these areas, I know that chivalry and bravery is looked with respect. Cowardice is looked down upon. So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we must think many times before deciding to quit. We must bring a legitimate government in Afghanistan, which means dominated by Pakhtuns, before we quit. I do know that public opinion is in favor of quitting everywhere, but I also believe, with all my experience, that generally leadership is to flow with public opinion. But sometimes in the lives of leaders or countries, a time comes when the public opinion is wrong. Real test of leadership is at that time, where you change the public opinion. Don't let it go wrong, because the world will suffer. So one expects delivery from the leaders. So after all this, I think I would like to end with my vision for a recipe for peace or stability. In broad terms, I think, first of all, in Pakistan domestically, in Pakistan, I believe Pakistan has to be put back on track. It has got derailed totally. How do you do that? First of all, first thing to be done is to stabilize its economy. Nothing can happen in a country without a stable and rising economy. The welfare of the people, development of the state. This is the responsibility of leadership and any government. And if this is not being done, this cannot be done if the economy is nosediving. So therefore, economy has to be turned around. And it can be. Because in 1999, when I see the figures, I think the situation now is far better than in 1999. It can be turned around. It's a matter of turning the budget deficit around, the fiscal deficit and the balance of payment deficit. It can be done. Then the focus will be on the people, the welfare of the people and the development of the state. Because what gels countries together is welfare, well-being of people. That gels. So therefore, whether it is ethnic diversity or religious diversity or any diversity, if there is well-being, people are happy, their standard of living is improving, they'll gel together. So therefore, the economy. Then is the political stability. Unfortunately, there is total political anarchy in Pakistan. And finally, we have to defeat terrorism and extremism. Easier said than done. The prerequisite for all this certainly is a leader and a political party which can unify in thought and action the mandate of the people, the strength of the people of Pakistan, the military and the bureaucracy. If these three can be unified in thought and action, all this that I've said can be done. It is doable because Pakistan has the potential. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, another political alternative in Pakistan is essential. At this moment, the leadership in Pakistan and the political parties in Pakistan are totally incapable of doing this. Therefore, the next elections in Pakistan are of very, very great significance, not only to the people of Pakistan but to the world. And this must be understood by the people of Pakistan and the world. That we have to have another alternative, political alternative introduced in Pakistan. On the regional side, I believe we have to have peace. We have to have rapprochement with India, certainly. A lot of people say that you are a man of war. In India, people have been, you are a man of war. How are you talking peace? My answer to them always has been, I am a man of war, but I am a man for peace. Because I have seen the ravages of war which none of you have seen. Because my people, my soldiers have died in my arms in the wars. My son is named after my best friend who was killed in action. So I know that. I know what war means. So therefore we have to have peace. And of course, I can very confidently say that we have a very near peace with India on all the three issues of Sir Creek, Siachen and Kashmir dispute. And I think it can be revived if there is sincerity and if there is flexibility and boldness in the leaders. I have realized that these disputes, world disputes, intractable disputes, do not get to resolution because of that third quality. First is sincerity, second flexibility to understand each other's points of view, but boldness, courage. Because when you reach an agreement, it's always a give and take. It cannot be a take and take. Nobody is going to allow that. So it is the give part of the give and take which creates the problem. Because that give part which both the parties are going to have to do will create agitation in their own backyard, in their own countries. Maybe they get scared because there will be some political backlash, they will lose political clout, they will lose their own popularity. Well, to them I say that nation, state and the region and the world is more important than self. So therefore, if the leader is not prepared to take these personal risks, and then there will be no deal. Lastly is global. I believe that I did propose a strategy of enlightened moderation, which I think is a two-pronged strategy, wherein the Muslim world must understand that we have to shun and reject extremism and terrorism and go on the path of socio-economic development, because we are in the worst state in the world. The Muslim world is the worst socio-economically. and concentrate on our socio-economic development. That can only happen if we restructure our own sole organization of OIC, which we were doing. In 2005, I proposed its restructuring, and we were moving forward on restructuring the OIC so that it delivers on the socio-economic aspects of the Muslim world. But on the side of the West and the United States especially, we have to resolve the political disputes which are agitating the Muslim minds, especially the Palestinian dispute and Kashmir for Pakistan. We have to address them. We have to use all our resources, all our capabilities of coaxing either side. We have to come to resolution of these disputes. Then only can we have a peaceful world, a peaceful region, and a peaceful Pakistan. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.